Well, hey everyone, great to be with you. And my name's Jud Wilhite. Just honored to be able to share a few things with you. I know you're going to learn some awesome things about leadership, some great things about vision, about how you can not only bring glory to God, but really help people through the church community. And that's awesome. But I want to remind you of how important it is to manage the small details of your life. It's a message that I've championed for years through Deadly Viper Character Assassins, the web community that we've developed, Mike Foster and I, as well as through writing and other things. But character is so important. I mean, think about it this way. When you think about the Titanic, most people think that what sank the Titanic was an iceberg. A ship hit an iceberg, the thing sank and went under. But in reality, other ships had hit similar kinds of icebergs and emerged intact. I mean, there's no way an iceberg was going to penetrate the double thick steel on the hull of the ship. And what many people believe now is that what actually sank the Titanic was 3 million faulty rivets that held the ship's steel to the hull. Somewhere in a factory somewhere, they used substandard iron, they cut some corners, they didn't manage the details, and then when the Titanic hit that iceberg, those millions of faulty rivets catastrophically failed. The ship's hull the steel immediately came off from the hull, and water just began to rush in, and the Titanic was doomed from the moment it struck that iceberg. And I think there's a lot of parallels there for our own lives. A lot of us go about ministry, we go about life. There's a lot of things happening on the surface. God is using you. So many of you have tremendous gifts and abilities, but you've got to manage the details within it. And as a ministry gets more successful, as more and more people begin to join it, as the leadership demand grows, as the criticism grows in the community, because I'll tell you this: the larger you get, the more criticism you'll get. You won't get less. Trust me. But as all of those things are happening, as the ministry is expanding, it becomes more and more apparent that you've got to manage those details. And I think there's more opportunity and temptation to not manage those details and to get lazy about it. I just heard a few weeks ago of another friend who I love very dearly, and you've heard many of your own stories, and some of you may be people who've survived some of these kinds of blowouts and are now, God is using you again. But this individual was on his second chance. He had been in a ministry situation, had an adulterous affair, went through a restoration process, and was now in another ministry situation. Was actually doing tremendously well, was making a difference. This church was dynamic, it was growing, people were coming to faith, they were growing to full devotion to God, awesome stuff. And then he slipped back into an affair with the same woman that he had had the affair with earlier. And my heart just broke for this guy. And now he's sidelined probably for the rest of his life, at least for the foreseeable future, and should be as he tries to recover and put himself back together. But he's got so many gifts and so much talent and so much to offer. And he's going to face that pain the rest of his life, that he can't use those gifts to the full extent that God would have had him use them because he made a character mistake. Listen, we call it in the Deadly Viper Character Assassin community, the assassin of character creep, that there is an assassin out there that is coming for each one of us. And his operation is to get us to sort of just forget about the details, to kind of subtly and slowly just sort of drift a little bit in the area of our character. And then none of this stuff happens quickly and abruptly. More often than not, character failures happen subtly and slowly. I mean, who wakes up in the morning and actually journals, dear journal, today I plan to commit fraud, which will ultimately lead to my demise and to the end of the ministry and to, as my involvement with it, and to, the personal destruction of my family. I mean, nobody does that. Nobody thinks that way. Nobody talks that way. These things happen subtly and slowly, and then before you know it, because one line is crossed and another line is crossed and another line is crossed, bam, you're right in the midst of a situation you don't know how to get out of. And so many people get damaged and impacted because of that. So I want to share with you a couple things on how we can guard against the assassin of character creep. And the first is simply this: to plan for the assassin of character creep, to realize that he's coming and to be ready. I have a plan in my life. I don't meet with a woman alone. This is my personal plan. It's not one that I dictate to the rest of the staff, but they all know this is how I operate. I always have someone else with me in counseling situations and life and personal situations. I very rarely, unless I absolutely am in a situation where I can't travel alone. And if I do travel alone, I try to find a situation when I get to where I'm going, where I'm staying with a friend, staying with someone else. So I've got people around me. I'm just trying to be smart. I'm realizing that if these things can happen to smarter, brighter, better people than me, then they can happen to me. And I'm a fool if I don't realize that. And you're a fool if you don't realize that you and I could both fall at any minute if we're not aware and careful and make plans to maintain our character. And so whether it's travel, whether it's meeting with, when it comes to money, I think that's another issue where you have to be really careful and have strong accountability in your life. In fact, I can remember being with Mike Foster several years ago, and we had read about a guy who was in the paper at the time because it was a pastor, and there had been a photo of him taken in a hot tub with another woman who wasn't his wife, and she was topless. Okay, this is not good PR. Okay, this is not good PR for Jesus here. And this guy's in, a really difficult situation. So we adopted a little slogan, and that was this: keep your hands off the money, keep your pants up, and stay out of the hot tub. And if you will do those things, just those things, you will have a certain form of success. I call it success by default. You'll just be the last person standing. You'll stay in the game long, long term. And God will use that. In fact, this past week was a tough week for me and my family. My mother passed away this past week. We did her memorial service. She was a wonderful woman. She had me in her 40s, so my mother was 80 when she passed away. And tremendous godly woman. But as I sat at her funeral, hundreds of people all around, I was so blown away by how many lives she impacted. And she didn't do it in a flashy way. She didn't do it. She never had the platform. She never had the mic. She never leveraged upfront leadership. Those weren't her gifts. Her gifts were behind the scenes. But she impacted so many. And the way she did it was over the years, day in and day out, faithful living for God. And I walked away from that thinking a lot about Eugene Peterson's book title, A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. And my prayer for you and my prayer for me is that God would give us all a long obedience in the same direction. Plan for the character assassin. And secondly, operate by the media mode of operation. And that is simply this: never do anything today that you would be uncomfortable with seeing on the front page of the newspaper tomorrow. Don't do anything today that you'd be uncomfortable with seeing on the front page of the newspaper tomorrow. And give your heart and your life to God. People can take a lot of things from you, but they can't take your character. You can surrender it, but they can't take it. Maintain your character, keep it, follow God in faith, and all these other wonderful things that you're learning will have the opportunity then to be implemented and put into play over the long term, and your impact will be multiplied, and it will be great. Thanks for giving me a few minutes.